Someone said, that's the fanciest kitchen I've ever seen in Sicily.
Well, I'm glad they like it.
I love it. I love it. Okay, here we go. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us this Saturday morning. It is a great day of celebration. Not only do we have Anissa Helou with us today, but the Carlos Museum, today is the first day that we've been able to open to the public, and so we're thrilled. So please visit our website to learn about COVID restrictions and what we are doing to make sure that you are safe and how you can make a reservation to visit the museum. I'm Elizabeth Horner. I'm the Director of Education here at the Carlos Museum, and I'd like to start the day with some thanks. Warmest and deepest thanks to our good friend Sharon Lemaster for making today's program possible. Sharon is a member of the Carlos Museum and a member of our docent guild. She is a remarkable woman of many talents and interests. She's a fantastic photographer, and she's also an avid home chef who's been cooking her way through COVID. And so she was very generous in her support of this program. I'd also like to thank the folks at Georgia Humanities and the Decatur Book Festival for their ongoing partnership in helping us to promote events at the Carlos Museum. We are thrilled to welcome Anissa Helou. Anissa has led such a rich and interesting and ever-evolving life. She was born in Beirut to a Syrian father and Lebanese mother. And as a young woman, influenced by the feminism of Simone de Beauvoir and other French existentialists, she eschewed cooking, not wanting to be domesticated. At 21, she left Beirut for London to study interior design and later the history of art. She worked for Sotheby's. She ran an antique shop in Paris. She advised members of the Kuwaiti ruling family who were forming their collections of Islamic art. And she is herself a sophisticated art collector. Her first cookbook, Lebanese Cuisine, was born of a desire to capture the recipes of her mother and grandmother, who she says were remarkable cooks. It was followed by Street Cafe Morocco, Mediterranean street food, modern meze, and others. Our focus today will be her gorgeous 9th book, Feast, Food of the Islamic World, which I have here. And she joins us from her fabulous kitchen in Sicily, which overlooks the Mediterranean. Anissa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I was immediately drawn to this book and to you because this book mirrors the long history and the vast geographic expanse of the Islamic world that we see in our current exhibition, Wondrous Worlds, Islamic Art and Islam Through Time and Place. And this cookbook really goes through time and place. And it seems that your other books, your first books, were focused more on specific geographic regions. And I wondered if you could just speak a little bit about the reason for looking through this lens, through Islamic, both religion and culture.
Well, it came about because of my agent in New York asking me to think about writing a comprehensive book about Middle Eastern food. And I didn't really want to do it because Claudia Roden had done it before. I mean, I would have added a lot of fresh material, of course, but, you know, Paula Wolfert had done, you know, Eastern Mediterranean and others. And I wanted to do something more original or more novel, let's say. And so I kind of mulled over the idea of a comprehensive book. And as the Arab Spring, you know, after the Arab Spring happened, well, it started with 9/11, to be honest, the vilification of Islam and Muslims. But, you know, the Arab Spring kind of brought it into focus. And I was thinking that maybe it would be a good idea to present Islam and Muslims in a positive light, you know, given how much politicians and journalists kind of associate terrorism with Islam. I mean, you know, a kind of ridiculous prejudice. And being a food writer, I thought, what better than thinking about the foods of Islam? And given that it's a very long, rich history, great civilizations in the empires, etc. So I kind of discussed it with my agent, who thought it was a good idea. And then I started researching. And I realized that it was like a huge project. So I made a list of the kind of Muslim majority countries, and you know, I knew the Middle East very well, so that part of the research wasn't going to be, you know, very hard, because I had done a lot of it already. And so I started looking at the art, and as you say, it's still the same, more or less, as the empires. It's kind of this arc of Muslim majority countries that hasn't really changed that much. I mean, it goes further into Indonesia, but so I was like very excited about it. My agent was excited about it. I wrote the proposal, and fortunately, Echo, Dan Hampton at Echo in New York, was very enthusiastic about it and commissioned it. And then it took me another 3 years to write it. I spent about a little bit over 2 years kind of researching it, thinking about it, wondering exactly how to build it. Because, you know, when you have so many different countries, it's very difficult to kind of put together a book that is, you know, coherent and not repetitive. And initially I thought countries by countries, and then I thought it'd be too repetitive. Then the normal kind of, you know, starters, main course, whatever, felt very, very dull. And I came up with the idea of doing essential foods, you know, like bread, rice, the whole beast, because, you know, it's very much part of the celebrations and the sacrifice. And that's how it came about.
So one of the things that you say is that there really is no such thing as Islamic cuisine.
No.
And like the art in this exhibition, you know, the food of the Islamic world is quite diverse, and yet there are connections that run across time and place. And so can you say something a little bit about that, both the diversity and the commonalities?
Well, the commonality is to do with rituals. I mean, you can take Ramadan as like the most important time of the year, and a time that is observed everywhere in the Islamic world. Of course, the food changes from one place to another, but there is one common thing, dish or type of food that you find everywhere, and that is kebabs, you know, skewered meats, grilled meats. And also the two staples, bread, you find bread everywhere, even in Western China, Northwestern China. I mean, China is not a bread country, but in the Northwestern Uyghur country, and in Xi'an, you see bread, and also the noodles are made with wheat. So, and then rice is another staple. So you have two staples, bread is one staple, and rice is another. Some countries have both as staples, and others have bread or rice. And then the way of eating, the hospitality, the importance of food during celebrations, during rites of passage, during important times of the year, secular and religious. These are the commonalities. Then, of course, and then you have the main influences. Persian cuisine is the mother cuisine, and it influences everywhere. But then the Ottomans came in and developed their own. And then the Mughals in India had their own cuisine as well. So you have the three great sort of cuisines of the Islamic world. And then, of course, you know, you go to Indonesia and you get a bit lost, because you don't really see much of these influences, and the food is quite different. But rice is ever present again, but it's short grain and not long grain. It depends on where you are.
So you mentioned that concept of hospitality, and one entire section of the exhibition is devoted to the concept of hospitality and the importance of it, and you write in the introduction that it's even, it's in the Quran. And can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, I have a terrible memory, so I don't remember the exact saying. I can't remember if it's in the Quran or in Hadith, but it is a kind of like a tenet of Islam that you have to honor your guests. It's absolutely essential to honor your guests with food and drink. And in fact, wherever you go in the Islamic world, anywhere, it is, sometimes I kind of laugh at myself, especially in London more than here, that I receive people and I hardly offer them anything. And I think, if my mother, and I'm not Muslim, but still the kind of Lebanese hospitality is legendary, really. Anywhere you go, whether you go to a shop, I mean, I don't know if you've been to Morocco, but for instance, if you enter a shop in Morocco, you're offered mint tea. They don't know you. They don't know whether you're going to buy or not. Everywhere you go, there's this wonderful spirit of welcoming you. Mostly, with a drink or with food, but there's always this kind of attitude that whether you're a stranger or a family or friend or whatever, you meet somebody and they're open to you. It's very rare to find a closed attitude.
And I wonder if it's also related to, one of the pillars of Islam, this idea of Zakat and Charity. I do remember distinctly being in Egypt during Ramadan, and, restaurants and corporations, companies, just the streets were full of feasts that were being provided to the community.
This is a particularly wonderful time. I wrote an article about Ramadan and the Emirates for Saffron many years ago. And I said in the end, because there are some countries where it's difficult for you to enter homes and taste their food. I mean, the sort of home cooking. But during Ramadan, as you say, like in Egypt, they call them Ma'idat al-Rahman, which is the table of the merciful. So these banks or corporations or even rich locals in the community lay, a feast for whoever once needs it. I mean, mostly it's for the needy. In the Emirates, in the Arab world, in the Gulf, the rich sheikhs or families or whatever send out like 100 meals or more to mosques or to tents to feed whoever wants to be, to break their fast with others.
I remember also being in Turkey. I think it was is it Konya, where the home of Rumi, and was there during sort of some festival where there were lambs slaughtered. And this I was struck by the history of the food, and that the food of the people of Mecca and Medina at the time of the Prophet, which was, dates and some grains, but a lot of meat from their flocks. This is a through line all the way from the 6th century, 7th century to the present.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the sort of, the slaughtering of the whole animals, you buy a whole animal, not only for your family, but also to kind of give out some of the meat. Like there's this thing, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And during, I think, Adha or another celebration. And, the meat element is actually everywhere, because there is no chance of any feast being celebrated without having a goat or a camel or a lamb slaughtered to provide the main sort of course or courses. Or beef, actually. When I was in Uyghur, China, I went to a circumcision in Hotan, I think it was, or maybe it was somewhere else. And they had actually slaughtered 1 or 2 cows.
And then there's the famous story that everyone writes about when talking about your cookbook about the camel hump. You don't have to talk about that.
That's my pièce de résistance.
Yeah, you guys will have to get the book from the Carlos Museum Bookshop to hear about the camel hump. It's quite interesting. So I think some of the best meals I've ever had in my life were in Turkey. And I just loved when you talked in the introduction to the book about the kitchens of the Topkapi Palace and sort of the test that individuals would have to go through in order to get a job as a chef. Can you tell us a little bit about the kitchens and how they functioned and this particular test?
Well, the test was amazing. It was just cooking rice, and it seems to be something very plain, but in fact, the way to cook rice is very important. You don't want it to be stodgy, whether it's short grain or long grain. I mean, in Iran, it's much fluffier than, for instance, in Turkey, but the grains need to be separate and they need to be fully cooked. And so all the chefs were put through that one test of cooking rice, and if they did it properly, they were hired. But the kitchens were divided in different specialties. So you had the bakers, you had the sweets makers, you had the kind of grill people, the rice people, and I think, I don't remember the figures, but they catered for thousands.
I think in the book you said 4,000 meals a day.
Yeah, so you can imagine, I mean, I went to the Topkapi Palace and I went to the kitchens. You don't actually get that much of a sense now of the hive of activity that must have been then. But there are miniatures and paintings and illustrations that show a little bit how they operated. But you can imagine how fabulous it must have been kind of being there with all these cooks, preparing all these. I mean, I did it once in Iran, in Isfahan, during Ashura, and I went into a mosque, at the back of a mosque, where they were cooking for 3,000 meals to give out as alms, because that's what they do during Ashura, or the Muharram, the 10 days of Muharram. It is incredible. And again, it's part of the religion, like in the Sufi, in the Sufi religion, the kitchen is a very important place, and it's a place where you develop your spirituality and you progress as a spiritual person. So, when I think about how I refused to cook for a few years when I was young, and now I really enjoy cooking. I still don't cook on a daily basis, to be honest. And I don't have a family, so I never cook and I wouldn't want to cook anyway. Once I had my nephew stay with me, and after 2 weeks, I was so happy he left, because I couldn't even think what to cook for him anymore. So I can imagine the stress that mothers have of providing daily meals for their family. But it is a great occupation, and it's very sort of soothing. I mean, depending on how you do it. For me, it's a kind of, it's an art. I like to be very, very specific, very precise, very neat, and buy the best ingredients and prepare things carefully. And it's just like a lovely occupation.
Well, so let's talk more about rice, because rice is going to be part of what we're cooking today, or what you're demonstrating today. As you go through the cookbook, one review I read in the New Yorker talked about, at first you're struck by the sort of repetition of the number of rice dishes, particularly like biryani or rice pudding, and yet it's these variations that demonstrate the diversity. Through this one food stuff, rice, you've got this unbelievable diversity across cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, you have the different types of rice, short grain, long grain, medium grain. In Lebanon, for instance, they would use short grain. In Turkey as well, by the way. But in Iran, they use long grain, but not as long as in Pakistan and India, for instance. And I actually learned that kind of recently, that they prefer a kind of shorter long grain. And the very long one that is, the one used for the biryani, which is very fluffy and beautiful, by the way, is they consider it as, somewhat inferior, not totally, but. So today I am going to make, Iran is actually the country where rice is, at its apogee. I mean, it's like the most precious food for them. And they have three basic ways of cooking it. One is parboiling it. Well, first you have to soak it. Then you parboil it, and then you let it steam, and the bottom needs to develop a crust. The other one, this one is called palau. The other way of cooking it, it's called kate, and it's by the absorption method. So you soak the rice, you wash it, you soak it, and then you add enough water for it to be absorbed. And it still builds a crust all around it, actually. And the third method, which is what I'm preparing today, is tachin, and it's baked rice. So you soak the rice, you parboil it, then you mix it with yogurt and eggs and saffron, and you layer it with whatever meat, if you want to use meat, actually. And then you bake it for a long time until it develops. It becomes like a rice cake. In fact, I can show you part of the one I made earlier.
Oh, how
I
beautiful.
add some of it. So
I'm going to turn off my camera so that people will see only you. I may come back in with questions as a disembodied voice, but here.
So this is tachin. In fact, mine is higher than they would make it in Iran, and the rice should actually be quite compact because they press it down, and then it stays in the oven for, I don't know, actually more than an hour. The Iranians are very particular about what pot they use. And I'm sure I'm not using the right pot because it should probably be thinner to build a kind of darker and a thicker crust without the rice becoming too cooked. But it's a wonderful dish, to be honest, and very simple to make once you kind of get the hang of it. What it takes, but it's the preparation time is not that long, but it's the cooking time that takes, so you have to think ahead when you plan to make it and start like 3 or 4 hours ahead, because it has to stay in the oven at least an hour and a half, if not 2 hours. So basically I will bring the rice. I've done everything beforehand because there isn't that much time. So this is a rice that I buy here, basmati rice, organic basmati rice that I buy here. And it's long, but it's not that long. And it's probably more or less how they would have it in Iran. So I kind of made this a few times to get the right, the right consistency. First, you have to kind of add, well, I add the oil so that the grains kind of get coated and stay somewhat separate. They will never, I mean, it's almost impossible to have them completely separate in this way of making it, but this helps. So the first time I put everything together, the yogurt, the egg, the oil and everything, but now I'm going to put the oil first and then add the yogurt. And then the meat, you cook it separately and make sure that you don't leave any kind of runny sauce in the meat so that it doesn't soak up the rice. So this is the rice and the oil. Then the yogurt, which is very important. What is important is to use a yogurt that is quite thick. Don't use a runny yogurt because then you have too much liquid in with the rice. So I add 2 eggs.
Anissa, when you say, it's a long grain rice, but not too long, I mean, when I go to the store, I basically see, there's sushi rice, there's what's labeled just plain white rice, and then there's basmati and jasmine. So if I'm looking to buy the right rice, what am I buying?
You're buying basmati, but it depends which basmati. I mean, in Iran, they have their own rice. So and it's not called basmati. They have like Sadri, Hashemi, Damsia. They have different names for it. And it's never very long. The basmati, but in America or in Europe, you just buy basmati and try and buy aged basmati because they age the rice. Another thing I learned when I went to Iran, I didn't know that they aged rice before. But it's very important. And in Iran, they're so particular about which rice they buy, where they buy it from. They buy blocks of salt to add to the water in which they parboil the rice. It's a complete sort of, it's not obsession, it's a complete sort of way of thinking about a food stuff, and in a much more committed way, because it's so important to their cuisine.
And do you know what is the process for aging the rice?
You have me there. I have no idea. I never asked, but I know that they age it for a year. I guess they spread it. I don't know. If there's someone who knows, maybe they'd like to chip in.
There's someone who says you just store it, which is an interesting question to me too, because I read this article about, the best basmati rices you can buy. And it seemed that in Atlanta, the only way to buy the best basmati rice was in a 20-pound bag, which that seemed like a lot of rice. And so will it keep?
It does keep, actually, and sometimes you can get weevils, little tiny black insects in the rice. But you shouldn't throw away the rice because you just wash it and get rid of them, and it's fine. By the way, I am using the saffron unground, in threads, but in Iran, everybody would criticize me madly for doing that, because they grind it and then they soak it in either rose water or water, and then they use it. And
so you're saying you're using the thread without grinding it?
Yeah, I'm using the thread, but they wouldn't. And the reason why they wouldn't is that actually it is more intense to grind it and to soak it. You always kind of soak it in water or rose water before you use it for whatever dish, ice cream or this dish or whatever dish you do. But I actually like to see the threads. So I do something that is not entirely approved of, but it's fine. I'm happy. I don't mind being criticized.
So back to the rice. I just learned in the last few years about soaking rice in advance. We have questions about how long do you soak the rice, and is the rice parboiled at the point that you have it there? How long do you cook it?
No, don't buy parboiled rice for sure. You soak it a minimum of 30 minutes and preferably for 2 hours with salt in the soaking water. And you have to rinse it first to get rid of the starch. When you're mixing the rice, be careful not to break it. Be quite gentle with the way you mix it so that you don't break the grains. So now it's more or less kind of ready to be built. I will put a little bit of salt. Even though I salted it when I soaked it and when I parboiled it. but I'm sure it can take more. And it's beautiful. And as you can see, it's not wet. It's very important not to have it wet, even if it's going to be in the oven for a long time. What it's going to cook by, I mean, it's already like half cooked or a third cooked, and it will cook through the heat and being, you know, closed. So this is my mold. And this is, as you can see, there's very little meat. This is the meat that I stewed with onions and just salt. No, hardly any seasoning, but it's still very tasty. I used lamb, but you can use veal, but a cut that is quite, if not fatty, quite sort of not so lean and quite tender. I tried it with veal as well, and the butcher gave me a cut from under the shoulder. I didn't quite understand what cut it was, but it worked out really well.
And what cut of lamb is this?
This is the leg.
The leg.
I use the leg. So I'm going to put one layer. You can do two things here. You can mix the meat in with the rice, or you can layer it. And I prefer to layer it because also when you cut it, it's more equal. You know where the meat is. And so you want to spread it evenly.
And I noticed you didn't put any sort of oil in the bottom of the pan. Is that one of the things that helps with the crust?
Well, I could have, but it's a non-stick and there's a lot of oil in the rice already.
Okay.
So I didn't really need to do that. So here the meat is cut into kind of smallish pieces. And I don't take them all the way to the edge so that the cake doesn't have like dark spots. So the rice goes on the bottom, completely on the bottom and on the sides.
So the meat's completely encased in the rice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not sure what kind of lamb you have access to in Sicily, but I'm wondering if you can help those of us in America where our choices seem to be American lamb and Australian lamb.
American, I mean, I don't want to sound rude, but American lamb is actually mutton. You know, it's much older than it should be. If you buy a leg of lamb in America, it's like, I don't know, 10 pounds. It's a huge piece of meat. Whereas here, if I buy a leg of lamb, it's like not even 5 pounds. So I buy a lamb that is quite small and young and almost milk fed. I mean, if it's milk fed, it's maybe a little bit too young. But it's very beautiful and very kind of pink and lovely and very tender as well.
There's a specialty food purveyor here called D'Artagnan, and they do offer Australian lamb. Do you know anything about it?
No, I don't, but I think Australian lamb is good. It's probably, I don't know, is it frozen or does it come fresh?
It comes frozen.
Well,
because it's mail ordered. I mean, someone says that D'Artagnan offers both fresh and frozen.
Well, fresh is preferable, to be honest. As long as the lamb is not too old, you know, as long as the cuts are not enormous. When the lamb is too old, it becomes, the taste is too strong. And it's not, you know, some people hate lamb because they think it's like too strong, too gamey. But it's only gamey if it's an older animal like mutton. more than, a young, up to 1-year-old lamb.
And someone has asked a question about whether or not a halal butcher would have better lamb than just a regular grocery store.
Probably, because also the halal butcher would be catering for people who cook that kind of food. So when I was cooking in California, I went to a halal butcher and I used to buy goat from him, and it was amazing. So you see this is ready to go in the oven, covered with either a lid if you have a lid, or aluminum foil. And I mean, we don't have time now, but once it's baked, what you do, I now put it in a 200 degrees centigrade oven, which is 400 Fahrenheit, for an hour and a half. It would be a little bit, the crust would be a little bit thicker than this one and a little bit more golden. But once you take it out of the oven, what you do is you put a plate over it and then you invert it. With a pan like this, it's very easy because it's non-stick. You don't have to worry about it like not coming out. I also bought a sort of a cooking pot, and it's a kind of newish material, but at least new to me. It looks like speckled gray, and it's kind of coated aluminum, and it has silicone handles, and it goes in the oven. It's a bit wider than this, so the cake would be less high, and it would be a different way of having it. But this is quite beautiful, as you can see from, the one I made earlier.
It is beautiful.
And ideally, I think next time maybe I will cut the lamb in kind of thinner strips so that I have an equal layer inside, but it doesn't really matter.
So a couple of questions in the chat. One, I think we haven't been quite clear yet. Was the rice completely cooked?
No, I parboiled it for 3 minutes. So I rinse it, I soak it for 2 hours in salted water, I drain it, then I drop it in boiling water and time it for 3 minutes once the water comes back to the boil, and then drain it and rinse it with cold water so it doesn't go on cooking. And then I use it.
So the rice is parboiled, but you don't buy parboiled?
No, I never buy parboiled rice. Parboiled rice is it's almost like buying processed food.
And then you cooked the lamb, but how much did you cook the lamb? So because it will probably continue to cook once it's in the oven. So how
No, I cook it completely. So I slice an onion, a medium onion, and add a little bit of oil to the pan. I caramelize the onion to get a nice color to the sauce. And then I cut the lamb in about 1 inch, pieces. And then I cook it for about an hour in barely enough water to cover so that you want the water to disappear at the end and just have a thick sauce.
And if you were a vegetarian, would you be able to, what would you suggest in terms of a vegetable to replace the lamb or the meat with?
Well, actually potatoes would, I know it's starch on starch, but it would be quite nice. So you would cook the potatoes, not completely, but maybe 2/3, and then season them with something, maybe a little bit of saffron oil or saffron something, or whatever takes your fancy. You can also mix, you can use peas, but the peas will lose their bright green color. You can use artichokes, you can use Jerusalem artichokes, you can use whatever vegetable you think would work and not disappear or become mushy. And then or have the rice cake as it is and then serve it with, the vegetable of your choice. So you would mix it with the yogurt and the egg and the saffron water, and make a plain rice cake.
And so this is one of the questions in the chat is, you refer to this in the cookbook as sort of one of the ultimate party dishes because it can be made ahead. What are the things that you would serve with this? If you were doing a dinner party, what would the menu be?
Well, if I'm having this with the meat, it would be my main course, main dish. And then I'd have, like in Iran, they'd always have a platter of herbs and feta cheese and walnuts on the table and bread. I would probably, if it's the season of fava beans, I would do like a fava bean dish, green beans, nothing stodgy. Like tomorrow, I'm taking this rice cake to friends who are actually doing a pasta with meat. And another friend wanted to take something and she was going to do baked pasta. And I said, no, it's too much. Why don't we do an artichoke salad? And that would work very well. So maybe with that, you would make another stew to have like, a choice of two main courses. One of the khoresh, the Iranian stews that will go with the rice anyway, and a salad and the herbs and olives, little things on the table.
So someone just asked the question about what other spices are in this besides the onion, salt and lamb, and it's the saffron, which makes me want to. This rices and spices in Islamic cooking. And you showed me the other day when we were trying to set this up, your fantastic spice cabinet. And you mentioned that you buy spices on your travels. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about good sources for buying spices, how long they last. Here in America, they say you should throw out all your spices once a year and start over again, which sometimes seems so wasteful. Tell us your thoughts about spices.
Yeah, I would never do that. I keep my spices for years and they're perfectly okay. My saffron is also like, I keep it for years. I would never throw anything away. Occasionally, if the flavor or the smell has gone, then I wouldn't use it. But a very important thing in the Islamic world is the spice mixtures. So you have an endless variety of different spice mixtures. In Iran, they have a spice mixture that's called adviye, which comes from the Arabic word adwiya, meaning medicines. And the great cooks would mix their own adviye. And there's one for the jeweled rice, and there's one for something else and something else. So they have, it's like garam masala, you have different variations for different dishes. And then, of course, you have the Moroccan wrestle hanout that you can buy, that I would buy. You can't really make it. There are some spice mixtures that you can make at home and make very successfully, like the Gulf Abzad, which uses quite a lot of spices. But I make it at home, and there's a recipe for it in the book. But ras el hanout is like, it's too complex. So you can't really make it. But if you happen to travel in Morocco and you go to a good spice merchant, you can buy it either already ground or whole, and then you grind it at home. So if you buy your spices whole, you have a better chance of them lasting longer and being as flavorful as when you bought them. There are good spice merchants in America and England, and I would always buy a national brand. So for instance, for the spices, the Lebanese spices, I would buy a Lebanese, a Lebanese brand. I would go to the Middle East and shop and buy a Lebanese brand. The same for Iranian and whatever. There was a fun video the other day by somebody who does grandmothers, I think Palestinian grandmothers, and she took Trader Joe's za'atar and made them taste it, and one after the other said, no, this is not za'atar. So you have to be very careful I mean, you know, now that these exotic ingredients have gone into the mainstream and have become very trendy, all the supermarkets are making their own, etc. But not all of them have the right formula. Mm-hmm. And not all of them are like as authentic as they should be, or as genuine, or as, you know, as they should be. So I don't know. I mean, there is Kalustians in New York, and they do online.
Can you say that again? I couldn't quite hear that. What's the name of the company in New York?
Kalustians in New York, and they have an online, I mean, they sell online. There's also Sahadi, who's a Syrian like shop in Brooklyn. There are lots of suppliers. You just have to, and then there is this very fancy La Boîte aux Épices, and I think he's good as well. I haven't tried them, to be honest. So, and Penzies, which is the kind of great American brand, very well known. You know, I mean, I buy them on my travels, so I don't have this problem. But, you know, living in Sicily now, I have a problem if I don't have, I mean, I've got my stock, as you have seen. But if I need something, I'll have to go to London to get it, because here they're not into global cooking at all.
So if you're trying to choose between saffrons, what do you look for? Should you make sure that you're buying the threads as opposed to the ground, or what are you looking for in a good saffron?
Well, you want to see almost no yellow in it, unless it's bunched up and the yellow is at the bottom and you can get rid of it, or it doesn't interfere with the flavor. There's a lot of fake saffron around, and in fact, it's not saffron at all. It's like hay or whatever color. A friend of mine, a chef friend of mine, actually brought me a box from Morocco, and it wasn't saffron at all. So Iranian saffron is great, Kashmiri saffron is great, Sicilian saffron is great. In Italy, they have very good ground saffron because they use it for risotto milanese. Spanish saffron is great. So you really need to make sure that you're buying, probably not from the supermarket because it's so expensive and you buy so little. But, you know, from a Middle Eastern store, they have these kind of round, flat boxes of Iranian saffron, and it should be perfect.
Someone has put into the chat that there are good Indian grocery stores in Atlanta one called Cherion's. That's a good source for spices.
Yeah, it would be.
So we have a question about going back to this meal and what you would serve with it. What would you serve for dessert? And since Anissa Helou, Helou means sweet in Arabic. Great to have you answer that.
Well, I'm a saffron fiend, so I would have a saffron themed meal, and I would have saffron ice cream or saffron milk pudding as a dessert, garnished with pistachios. But you can also serve baklava, or, I mean, a Western sweet would not, or fruit, because often in the Middle East, they finish a meal with fruit. They don't serve dessert.
Yeah, I remember reading in your cookbook about about Damascus and fruit being something that was plentiful around the area of Damascus in the ancient world, and not other places, and how it couldn't travel along the Silk Roads and stuff because it would perish, but so that it made Damascus a center for fruit production.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this area called Ghouta, I think, is where they grow the fruit, has been very damaged by the attacks on the poor population. But yes, they have amazing. Also, they candy fruit in Syria, and delicious. You know, all kinds. You know, apricots. They candy also green walnuts that are amazing. Little baby aubergines. So candied fruit is a wonderful way to, you know, to finish candied fruit and fresh fruit, you know, to finish a meal like this.
It was a little tragic as I was reading the book and thinking about, you know, the places that you listed as sort of the centers historically of Islamic cuisine: Aleppo, Damascus, Baghdad, Beirut. These are all scenes of great horror. And I feel like that is part of your mission, is to sort of reunite or heal in some way through the study of cooking as culture. And I wonder if you can just talk about that a little bit.
Well, actually, my mission is to preserve basically traditional foodways, culinary lore, recipes, because I am actually an orphan of two countries. You know, both Lebanon and Syria have gone through terrible times. Syria still is. Lebanon too, you know, with the explosion this summer. Mm-hmm. So my main mission in this work is to preserve these recipes for future generations or people who read the books now and use them, and also you know, to kind of make them, to introduce them to these countries that were once beautiful and rich and you know, like Lebanon was a kind of center for Dolce Vita. It's no longer, I mean, some people still live the Dolce Vita, but it's like
the Paris of the Middle East.
Well, I don't know. I think this was a myth. But even when I lived there, I never thought it was the Paris of the Middle East. But it was, I mean, when I lived there, when I was a teenager, a young woman, and I lived there, I had a wonderful life. It's not the same anymore. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's wonderful to introduce people who don't know these cultures, culinary cultures, to introduce them to, and in the right way, not, you know, in a sort of adapted to the, you know, this sentence adapted to the American kitchen, which makes me sort of cringe a little bit.
Yes, you've described yourself as a purist.
I am a purist. And it's true. I mean, as far as food is concerned, and maybe other things as well. I like to, when I cook traditional food, I might kind of lighten it, make it a little bit more elegant, you know, like start thinking about how to keep the grains a little bit more separate, you know, think a little bit more like a chef, even like a Western chef, because like I'm now in between the two, but never bastardize or actually change it to the point that it doesn't have any relation to the original recipe.
So speaking of relationships, one of our guests who's an Emory student, hi Zimra, is curious about your art background and your deep knowledge of Islamic arts, and wondering if you see any parallels between the diversity and of Islamic art, of Islamic visual arts and foodways, cuisine.
That's a bit of a difficult question. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the food of the different countries, particularly, let's say, Iran, Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, Morocco, the very sophisticated cuisines are absolutely, I mean, are very elegant, very beautiful. So there is a relation between the arts, let's say the arts of the table, culinary table, and the Islamic, you know, Islamic art. But I guess that's, I mean, I don't know about the diversity. I mean, they are diverse cuisines, but, you know, you can group some cuisines together, like you can group Turkish, Lebanese, Syrian, Palestinian, Jordanian, not necessarily Egyptian, but to a certain extent, you know, under the umbrella of Levant. So you can then say Levantine, maybe not cuisine, but Levantine food. So the problem about using cuisine as a word for more than like a region or a country is that it doesn't make sense. Like people talk about Middle Eastern cuisine. There is no Middle Eastern cuisine. There is no European cuisine. In fact, even in Italy, when people talk about Italian food, some Italians will say, well, there is no Italian food. There's like Sicilian food, there's Tuscan food, or cuisines, let's say, because they're quite different. They change between the regions and there are regional, specialities. So
in the exhibition, a lot of the works of art that we see are meant for serving food. There's these incredible Moroccan, I think they're called Jabana jars, though I may be mispronouncing that. And even in paintings of feasting from the Mughal period, you see all sorts of wonderful dome shaped cooking pots. And so there's definitely a connection between the beauty of things made for the table and the specificity of dishes. In fact, somebody asked a question in the Q&A about when she's seen the dish you made today, sometimes it has a domed shaped top. And is that important, or is that just the type of pot that it was cooked in? Or
actually, I've never seen it domed, but it could be. The shape is usually circular, like a cake. It's a little bit lower than what I've done, and it can have like straight angles or rounded angles, like like the pot that I have. Well, it's actually a baking dish more than a pot. But in Indonesia, they have the conical, the yellow rice that they put in a cone and then they invert on the plate. I think there is a very strong sense of aesthetics, that of course you don't see on the street or in regular restaurants, but if you go and eat in homes, then you get to see how much attention goes into the presentation, and even in the cooking, so that the food looks quite beautiful, even if the colors sometimes are dark or intense. There is in Lebanon, in Iran, in Morocco, there is a very strong sense of aesthetics in both the dishes that are used to serve the food and the way the food is served and garnished.
So thank you so much for this today. I wanted to just close. One of the writers that I read about your book said that it was really an adventure story, as if you were Ibn Battuta of the culinary world. And I wondered, and he talked about what really comes across in the cookbook is not just the food, but your affection for the people that you met along the way, from street vendors to home cooks to famous chefs. And I wondered if you just had, is there one particular person or situation that really sticks out in your mind?
Lots. But one of the most recent ones was actually happened in Uzbekistan, where I didn't speak the language at all. I was in a beautiful market, I think in Tashkent, with my guide. And in Uzbekistan, they make these very beautiful breads. And I was really mostly interested in the breads. And across the aisle, in fact, quite far, across 2 or 3 aisles, there was this wonderful woman. And also they dress beautifully, they have gold teeth, and they're kind of very attractive. And there was this wonderful woman in kind of lively conversation with a very elegant older man. And she was selling bread. And I was looking at them and I was thinking, what are they talking about? Like, he's not a cook. But they seem to be talking about food. So I kind of dragged my guide and just jumped into the conversation via the guide, asking the man who he was, what he did. I mean, I was a bit bold, and what they were talking about. And it turned out that they were talking about some dish or bread or something. I mean, they were discussing food, and it was a wonderful encounter, totally spontaneous, and unexpected. And it was just wonderful to be with them. And they were also very welcoming. Again, it's very rare that I encounter people who hate me, for being either bold or taking pictures. Sometimes in Senegal, nobody would let me take pictures. And in Egypt, I nearly got beaten up by some kosher vendor who wouldn't let me take pictures. And then the next day, he kind of decided that I wasn't a health inspector and I was okay. And he offered me a plate of koshari with a spoon that he had kept in water that was everybody's spoon that went into that water. And I couldn't refuse because it would have been very rude. So these encounters are very amusing because they kind of, I think about them, something makes me remember them. And, I don't see these people again, of course, unless I return to the country. But, one particular poignant example was when I was in Kashgar 2 years ago. I had been there a year before, and I spent a morning with a woman baker, watching her make a very interesting multi-layered bread, not the regular one. And then when I went back the following year, I insisted with my friend and the guide that I needed to go back and see her and thank her and maybe give her a present. And I never found her. And it could be that she was taken away. And it made me really sad.
Well, I certainly hate to end on a sad note.
And then I'll tell you a funny story.
Okay, tell me a funny story.
A funny story. I don't know, a funny story. Well, actually a story that I used to, it's a little bit sad, but when I used to go to Syria a lot, I used to lead culinary tours there. There was one particular vendor in Madhat Pasha, Souk Madhat Pasha in Damascus at the end of Straight Street, who made the most delicious filled pancakes. They're called atayef, with fresh clotted cream. And the first thing I would do when I get to Damascus is I put my stuff in the hotel and the first thing I do is walk up. I always stayed not far. Walk up to this guy, they were called Ramadan Brothers, and say, fry me some now. They were the best pancakes, atayef I've ever had.
Well, I know, so as I said, I will email the recipe for what we made today to all of you who are in attendance. But I know you're going to want this book. It's gorgeous. And I've neglected to say that it won the James Beard Award. It's a gorgeous book. It's an exciting story of food. It's got fantastic recipes. And you can also purchase it from the Carlos Museum Bookshop. So go to carlos.emory.edu and Mark will order it for you. Anissa, I can't thank you enough for joining us from Sicily. It's been great fun getting to know you as we prepared for this talk. I'm obsessed with your stainless steel kitchen. It's just been an absolute delight.
It was my delight as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.